Hey, what's up, witches? I'm here. I made it. We made it. Hi, Merlin. Merlin made it. Merlin's here. I'm here. Hopefully, you all will soon be here to talk about this month's book club selection, or well, I guess last month's book club selection, which was The Real Witch's Garden. Spells, herbs. Merlin's trying to jump up on my lap. So anyway, The Real Witch's Garden. Spells, herbs, plants, and magical spaces outdoors. And I have a chorus of Merlins in the background. Hi, Runa. So I tried to kind of skim/plow through as much of this book as I could in June. I started out pretty good at the beginning of the month, and then as the month went on, it was harder and harder to kind of make my way through this book because, like, no tea, no shade, it was a little bit boring for me. Definitely a highly useful book, don't get me wrong, especially if you are someone who is much more Wiccan inclined than I am. But as I've often kind of mentioned in some of my videos, there's a reason I kind of didn't stick with the whole Wiccan witchcraft tradition, because for me and like my ADD brain, it was just too much to deal with. Don't have time for all that. And so this book is very extensive. It gives a lot of very in-depth tips, tricks, and rituals for how to set up a sacred space in your yard or create a witch's garden, and how to use that garden and that sacred space outdoors in your practice. So there is a lot of information to be gleaned and perhaps, adapted to your own practice in here. But in terms of like actually reading some of the rituals and practices involved in all of it, a lot of it was just very in depth, a lot of different steps involved, a lot of time, tools, and materials involved. And I don't have the mental capacity to sit and memorize all these different steps and rituals to kind of stick to that more traditional witchcraft and Wicca type of practice. So let's see if I can just kind of find what I highlighted in here to touch on. So the first thing I marked is that they just kind of touch briefly on in the beginning on like what the Wheel of the Year and the Sabbats are and how that's integrated into just general witchcraft and pagan practices. And then one thing that I did highlight here that I liked was that she notes not only do we celebrate the passage of the seasons, but we draw magical energy from them. And from an agricultural perspective, that same seasonality also tells us when to sow, tend, harvest, and do different things outdoors in our gardens. So not only is that just something that really drew me to paganism as a whole, is just always having that spiritual connection with nature and appreciation for it. And just, even when all of the rest of the world seems like chaos, we can at least be relatively certain, even with the interference of global warming, that for the most part, the seasons will continue in their cycle as they have done for eons. And that's something kind of nice to be able to rely on and have faith in personally. At least I think so. What do you want, Merlin? What do you want? Come here. Come here. Come. Oh. Merlin just had surgery last week. So we've been babysitting him for the last week or so while he recovers. He will be starring in the next all-feline production of Hedwig and the Angry Inch, to put it that way. Yeah, he has to wear his little cone of shame for at least another week, even though he just wants to go be outside and do all his regularly scheduled cat things. And I'm not letting him. And yes, he's very much not happy about it. But he's being an extra spoiled baby boy. So what else do I have to say about this book? It's probably going to be a rather short stream tonight because, yeah, I ended up skimming over a large part of this book, to be honest, just because, yeah, some of the more in-depth step-by-step rituals just weren't going to be applicable to me or anything that I wanted to do in my practice. She touches on like different elemental associations and magical associations with the elements, which I do kind of plan to touch on more in depth myself in a future video but just in case you're not aware, in most standard traditional witchcraft or Wiccan practices, you have the four elements, and then the fifth one is spirit. So you have like earth, air, water, fire, and then the fifth element, which makes like the fifth point of a traditional like Wiccan pentagram or pentacle, is spirit, which comes from within and is kind of just like the force. It binds us all together, and we're all part of it and connected through it. And then she also goes into some of the more traditional Wiccan associations as far as deity worship, which will typically just include the archetypal god and goddess, which you will often see further broken down into the triple goddess, which is maiden, mother, crone, and different aspects and archetypes that embody those things and those ideas. And then as the counterpoint to that, we have the horned lord, the horned god, very Kierninos vibes. And so I feel like if you are someone that is more along that Wiccan path, or even if you're not and you're someone like me that primarily works with like Norse deities, you can still take a lot of what's contained within these books, and within this book, where it's just more of that lady and lord. When I say go out in your garden or your sacred space outdoors. You have to face the four cardinal directions and call upon the lady and the Lord and be like, hey, lady, Lord, hey, everyone, I need you to stop what you're doing and come over here and see what I'm doing for you right now, and like back me up on this, guys. I'm invoking you every single time. And for me, I'm just like not really about that life. Like, yeah, I don't have the time or patience or mental short-term memory capacity to go out and do that every single time. Or if I do, it's just kind of a quick like mental check-in. So you could substitute with a more specific deity. And so in my case, I would be calling on Freyr and Freya as my lady and lord, which I often do when I am out in my garden. Like gardening with the Vanir is a lot of fun. Highly recommend it. So you can substitute or adapt these rituals and procedures as you will. But yeah, for me, I'm just like, I don't really feel a need personally to specifically go through all of that grand ritual every single time. I'm more like, I feel like when I'm outdoors, working in my yard, tending my garden, harvesting vegetables and flowers, and oftentimes what I will do is leave some of what I've harvested. I'll like go pick a little flower while I'm out there and leave it on Freya's altar. And I feel like just the act itself is enough to get their attention and their interest. Like, we're working outdoors with these land spirits, these nature deities, what have you. And so just the act of going out there and spending time in your garden and paying attention to it and giving it some TLC, to me, like that's already working with and calling upon those deities. You're already kind of going to have their attention, in my opinion. So I don't really feel the need to specifically invoke them and be like, hey, come see what I'm doing over here. I'm doing this for you. You better come pay attention, guys. I'm doing this for you, and you need to know. I don't know. That's just me. So, and I'm very much like a quiet, introverted person to begin with. So most of the time when I'm doing things, and even when I am specifically calling on and invoking my deities or talking with them, it's pretty much internal and through like mental telepathy anyway. So yeah, I'm just not one of those people in general that is always going outside and shouting things into the sky. But she does have some really useful advice, especially if you're someone who's just starting out and wanting to begin creating a garden or a sacred space. Um, she does have some really good, just practical advice and tips and tricks for doing that, and give some like suggestions and ideas for how you might go about setting it up, and like ways that you could, use rocks or crystals, create a spiral pattern, and have different plants that would correspond with different elements or ideas, and even plant specific plants in the four directions to correspond with those directions and elements, and be very detailed and precise and very thoughtful about it, which is definitely cool and something maybe I wouldn't mind doing. Yeah, using rocks for designs and symbols. That actually is what I ended up doing outdoors. I have a little like makeshift prototype altar. It's kind of like in its early stages, but it's just where I felt like an outdoor altar to Thor and his mother, the earth goddess Jord, needed to go. And it just started as literally just a pile of rocks that I had pulled out of our garden when I was tilling it, because it's full of rocks, our backyard. And so I put them over in this one little area. And then recently I went back out and kind of made a mound of dirt, and trying to kind of line the sides of the mound with stones to create like a little separated raised altar area for him. And I have the stereotypical cat hair sticking to my lip gloss. That's what I get. I'm like hating my hair right now. I'm not having a good hair day today, so this is what we're dealing with today. But yeah, I do like that it does go very in depth with suggestions and ideas for what you could actually do and build and create in your yard. And different things like that. What else do I have? Talks about, using the garden as a sacred space. So not just having a garden out there, but almost much like I do with my outdoor altars, carving out a specific area to be a workspace or a sacred space. And of course, this being like a Wiccan tradition book, goes into like how to cast a circle and call on the four guardians of the four watchtowers and all that jazz. Let's see, what else does it say? So yeah, it talks about determining where the four quarters lie, incorporating a permanent outdoor altar if should you so choose, which I have two out there now. I have just a Landvatier altar under my little fairy tree, and then now the little early stages Thor Jord altar. Luckily for me, I do have a privacy fenced backyard, so that does make things a little bit easier. And then, it talks about specifically seeking the blessing of the goddess and the god every time you go out to perform a ritual, or even just do something in your garden. If you're planting something, calling on the Lord and the Lady to bless your work and make it bear fruit. One thing that I did like and highlight here that I might incorporate, because it does remind me of some specific things that we know from the Eddas might have been part of Norse pagan traditions specifically, is it talks about making an Asperger, which I'd never actually heard this term before. But it says this is done by taking a few thin twigs about 6 to 8 inches in length and tying them at one end to make a sort of mini broom. And then what you do is you can dip it in like moon water or anointing oils, or in the Norse tradition, it would have been blood, or in some of the pagan rituals that I've been to more recently, they will substitute red ochre or iron oxide for the blood to still kind of get the same effect. And so, yeah, it talks about making this tool, the Asperger, to sprinkle and anoint your crops and your garden, which I really liked and I might start doing, just to have kind of a more formal ritual object for blessing plants and crops, because that is something that they would have done. And you'll even see a scene like that in the TV show Vikings, where they first go to settle over in the part of England that they were granted. Then the Vikings show up to start settling and farming the land, and all of the Christian Englishmen are aghast as they watch them perform this big pagan ritual that involves ritual sacrifice of animals and using the Asperger to sprinkle the blood on the soil, the newly turned soil, and have Freyr thereby bless the crops and give that fertility and that energy into the land itself to hopefully guarantee a good harvest. So that is something that I might actually do and start incorporating in my outdoor areas when I want to do some more formal things. I think that just, yeah, sounds like a cool, easy, and also maybe historically relevant way to do that. And so in my case, yeah, I would probably just use like some essential oils, or maybe a blend that I have custom made, or just perhaps some moon water that I've collected to do that. You know, maybe just go out and water your plants and anoint them with some special charged water. Kill two birds with one stone, you know? So I liked that idea. And then it does, yeah, really go in depth about these rituals, about moving to the different four directions and invoking all the different elements and invoking the god and the goddess, and gives you the words that you can say, and it's all very elaborate and formal, and it's not really my scene, man. So yeah, for the most part, a lot of this book was kind of take it or leave it for me. But I do like that emphasis being placed, whether you actually designate the different Celtic Sabbats on the Wheel of the Year or not, just incorporating that Wheel of the Year and that seasonal cycle into both your gardening and your pagan and spiritual practice outdoors, you know, in terms of just observing the seasons and following those ebbs and flows in terms of what you are doing both with your planting and your magical practice. But yeah, when it comes to all these like in-depth rituals and having to memorize like all these formal fancy words, I'm just not really about that life, guys. Another thing that I did highlight here, though, is an idea to select a plant specific to each goddess or god you wish to honor, and find a little designated area outdoors, or even in your house. If you live in like an apartment or somewhere where you don't have a lot of outdoor space, you could still buy like a little potted plant to designate different gods and goddesses that you work with, and bring that indoors and use that as a way to give them offerings. I've tried many times now to have a little plant on both Freya and or Freyr's altar, but I don't get a lot of like direct natural light back there, so it's kind of been hard to find a plant that will live. But I did like that idea, something that you could easily adapt to your own practice. And then What else? What else do I have? Mm-hmm. It talks a lot about the 4 elements, collecting rainwater. Yeah, what's this ritual? Invoking the elements and seeking the blessing of the goddess and the god. And so, yeah, that's kind of my only thing that I didn't really make this book as interesting or applicable to me specifically, is that I was kind of hoping for a better ratio of actual herb lore and herb knowledge in terms of not only like medicinal properties of herbs, but also magical properties of herbs and plants themselves. And this is more focused on creating an outdoor ritual space and, yeah, formalized rituals that you can incorporate into your everyday gardening, in terms of, yeah, invoking the elements specifically, having specific designated sacred spaces in your yard to represent the 4 elements, which could be cool if you are someone who is into casting a circle and doing all of that, and you want to work outdoors. You could set up your little 4 points with the elements and just kind of have something already set up to lock that circle in place anytime you're out there, or depending on how you see it, just kind of have like a permanent circle in place by having these specific spaces set up, and something that you could probably also do indoors if you wanted to. And then, yeah, it also talks about going to the 4 directions and invoking the goddess and the god, and gives you specific words and rituals and invocations that you can use and call on. And this is where it just really lost me, and I just started skimming through because it's like, it's really doing the most, you guys. It says take your water and your Asperger to each of the 4 directions, and using the Asperger, sprinkle some of the water, and that's fine, that's fine. But it says in the shape of an invoking pentagram of that element. And so it goes like, for air, it means you have to do it this way. And then for this element, you have to do it in a different direction, and like a different direction of drawing a pentagram for every single element. And I'm like, how am I ever gonna remember all of that? I'm gonna do it wrong every time and be like, okay, which corner does air start from again? Like, I don't have time for all that, you guys. And, like, that's cool if you want to go through and like draw shapes, like you could draw runes, you could do whatever you wanted to in the 4 directions if you do want to do like a fancy specific ritual outdoors. But yeah, I'm like, I just don't have the interest or capability to remember that specific of a ritual. That's just not what I want to be doing personally. Really? I'm not paying attention to him, so of course he's gonna go find like the loudest, crinkliest plastic bags in the room and like dig around in them and make all the noise. But yeah, and it talks about dedicating and consecrating elemental gardens, different things that you could do day, night, during different phases of the moon in your garden, how to care for your space, maintain it, different ways that you could use it. One thing that I thought was cool was a spell for promotion of nature's pest killers in your garden. So it says for this spell, you just take some fallen wood, and then it does give you like a specific ritual to do while you place the wood in your garden, and you invoke that elements and the goddess and the god and ask them to, specifically keep the pests away. But one thing that I did think was cool is that then after that it notes that not only is it a magical remedy, but fallen wood really does attract the kind of beetles and insects which help to keep pests under control. So it has a practical meaning behind it as well. So that's kind of cool. I'm definitely one who is prone to picking up not only just cool rocks that I find everywhere when I'm doing nature walks or hikes, but I also have like random pieces of wood and cool branches and sticks that I will find and want to pick up and bring home with me. So maybe if you found just a really cool stick on a nature walk, you could incorporate it into a specific ritual, and it would have a practical use in your garden as well to attract the right kind of insects, to keep the wrong kind of insects out of that area. So that was something interesting that was kind of new to me, and something that you might actually be applicable, both magically and practically. One thing that it does say here that I think is important to note, even with as elaborate as some of this book likes to get, it says it's easy to sometimes get caught up in the idea that magical tools and components for spells come from shops, and we forget that the most magical things are growing all around us. And this is something that I'm really glad to see being emphasized a lot more in the broader pagan community, and something that, working as closely as I do with the Vanir, I definitely think is important. And not even just the Vanir, but all of the Norse gods specifically. There's some great videos out there recently about how the gods created Midgard as this enclosed safe space for us to be able to live and thrive in, and therefore part of paganism, and I think especially Norse paganism, is recognizing the magical in the mundane, the everyday beauty and magic and spirituality of nature itself. Because just being out there and seeing all these different plants and being able to kind of read their energy and determine, like, is this a plant that might be giving off a good energy and be beneficial to me, whether it's magically or just being near it and spending time with it and things like that. It's just, I think, really good for us, healthy for us. And not only that, but yeah, just important to remember that everything we need for our spiritual and magical practice is already growing all around us. And just because a spell or a book calls for you to use a specific plant, herb, or crystal doesn't mean you have to go buy the book every single time. If you don't have something in your area, or you can't find it in a store, like, don't go on Amazon. Just go to like your local park, or go on a walk around your neighborhood and just see what calls out to you. See what you might just intuitively feel like you could use in a specific working or spell. Use what you have. Necessity is the mother of invention. So I think that is very important. It touches on the Victorian flower language of flowers, and that's something that you can definitely incorporate in your magical practice. Not only that, but I was actually, right before I jumped on this live stream, I was watching Scarlet Ravenwood's latest live stream, like Pagan Happy Hour, where she was talking about creating a witch garden, and talked about how a lot of the basis for our magical associations with herbs and plants comes from their traditional medicinal associations and uses. Because back in the day, what would come to later be labeled the witch was usually just the town wise woman and herbalist, and would be the person you would go to cure what ails ya, usually through her knowledge of the local plant lore. And so, yeah, I think a lot of that knowledge then switched from being practical and everyday applicable uses to, like, ooh, it's hidden now, which is the meaning of the word occult. And so therefore we can take a lot of those meanings and transpose them into the magical associations as well. So just use what you have, use what's near you, use your intuition, trust your gut with some of that kind of stuff. And then it says, this is very important, and also what I highlighted, not only can your garden be made of the magics you have worked and what you put into it, it can also be your way of paying for the magics and the blessings that you've been granted. And so that's definitely a big thing that we emphasize in the pagan community, is that equivalent exchange. And one thing that I will definitely always emphasize is equivalent exchange. It's a give and take relationship. And don't go, especially to the gods, and asks for something without giving them something in return. You should always do something to pay back the energies that you draw on and the blessings that you've been given. And I feel like, especially if you want to establish a good and healthy working relationship with your local land spirits, that's very important, and especially depending on where you live. And it's something that I touched on in my Working with Land Spirits video, and also have been emphasizing to people online when they're talking about establishing these relationships, is that I think certain areas and certain pieces of land, especially in the Midwest where it's been domesticated and farmed for so long, we have been drawing on the energy of that land for generations, and basically in some places sucking it dry. We all know the Dust Bowl. We might be in store for a new Dust Bowl thanks global warming. What are you doing now, Mayor? But yeah, in a lot of cases, we're not paying attention and giving back to nature. We're just using and abusing it. And so it's even more important to me from a pagan perspective to do all that we can, even if it just feels like a drop in the bucket, to give back, even if it's just giving an offering outdoors to your land spirits on a regular basis. Or for me, it's like when I harvest something from my garden and I eat it, I will then take like the trimmings from my zucchinis and my vegetation and go put it back outside on the outdoor altar or the compost heap, and giving a little piece of it back to the land in return. Yeah, I think it's really important. And yeah, especially some places need our love and care more than ever. Like someone in the Wisdom of Odin Discord the other day was kind of talking about, I've been living on this piece of land and working the land and farming it for a long time, but I'm not really feeling a connection with it. I'm not really feeling an energy from it. And I'm like, maybe it's because the land has just been drained for so long. It doesn't really have a whole lot left to reach out to people and give. So maybe it is going to require you putting in a lot more effort, and be a lot more one-sided for a while until it reaches that equilibrium again and is feeling good enough to give. Because we always say, like, you can't pour from an empty cup with us and our energy and emotions. And I feel like the same goes for nature. We can't just be taking and not giving anything back and expect it to just keep giving. We all read The Giving Tree, right? So yeah, I feel like, especially as someone that works with land spirits and Vanir, and just from an overall pagan nature lover perspective, it's important to just do what you can, even in those small ways. Like, even if you can't go out and be like environmental justice warrior and save the trees and chain yourself to a tree and do all that, there are little things that we can do personally to give back and maintain that equilibrium. And I think those things are just as useful and just as important as the bigger acts. So what else did I have kind of highlighted about this book? Talks about the Wheel of the Year again, and working in your garden and performing rituals based on the Wheel of the Year. It does note that in this tradition, which I believe is like the Celtic and Wiccan tradition, the Wheel of the Year actually begins and ends at Samhain, and that would be like the end of the year / beginning of the new year. But another important thing to note that I think I've also mentioned before is it's just as valid to work from the seasonal indicators where you live. You don't have to just go on the standard Wheel of the Year. Like if you live in another hemisphere, or you live, slightly further north or south of the equator, and you're someone where like it's time for Beltane and spring things, but it's still snowing and still frost on the ground where you live, you're totally okay and perfectly valid to push those rituals and celebrations back to fit within what is actually happening in nature where you're at, because that just makes sense. Go with what the energy and what the nature where you are is actually telling you it's time for. And so, yeah, then it gives a very specific wheel of the year, outside rituals and blessings that you can do. It touches on most of the major Sabbats like Imbolc, Beltane, Ostara, gives you specific things that you can do and specific rituals and invocations. But it's all kind of very repetitive with just, yeah, invoke the 4 directions and invoke the god and goddess. And it just kind of varies like what wording you're using based on what time of year and what holiday it is. But yeah, so for the most part, there, like I said, there was a lot of skimming going on in this book, and I don't have a physical copy, so I'm looking at my ebook version, kind of just seeing what I highlighted here. So yeah, it goes into the wheel of the year. There's a whole chapter on tiny and indoor gardens, vertical gardening. So there is, outside of like the in-depth magical rituals, she does give a lot of good advice if you're someone who is looking for tips on how to get started with either an outdoor or an indoor garden, and ways that you can actually go about creating one, well, not like actually physically and not just magically. But I guess, yeah, it just depends on how elaborate and do you want to go with the types of rituals and things that you're actually doing outdoors in your magical practice. For me, I'm just kind of very chaotic, intuitive, eclectic, go with the flow kind of person. And so, yeah, it's kind of hard for me to get in that headspace and take the time to really sit there and like do all of these things. Usually I'm just kind of like, oh, I feel like it would be a good time to go out here and like give some stuff to Freya and like see what's in the garden, and then I just go do it, and I'll pick some cucumbers and be like, thanks guys, and I'm gonna give you some little raspberries that I picked, thanks Freya. And hey, so far so good. You know, our garden this year is really taking off right now. My house runneth over with pickling cucumbers. I don't know what I'm gonna do with them all. I don't know what my cat's getting into back there that he's not supposed to be. It's getting warm in this room. Okay, so chapter 10 is when we finally get into actual list of plants and their magical associations. We're on page 119 out of 179. According to this, I'm 65% of the way through with the book at this point. So a little over halfway through the book, we finally get to the chapter that's kind of giving some common associations with plants. And in this case, plants associated with the deities were again going into those Wiccan archetypes of goddess as maiden, mother, and crone, and then god as hunter, oak lord, and holly lord, and just giving some general plants that you could associate with those different archetypes. She does then also list a couple goddesses and their links with specific plants or times of the year, but for the most part, let's see, we have Ceres, Sybil, Demeter, Istara, Flora, Iris, Nyx. So these are all Greek and Roman. No mention of Freya, no mention of Idun. So yeah, use your gut, use your intuition. If you work with specific deities, make your own associations. Plants linked to the elements, plants associated with the different Sabbats, plants associated with the 5 senses, plants associated with the different heavenly bodies and planets, plants associated with the zodiac signs. So this is kind of more along the lines of what I was personally looking for in terms of a witch's garden guidebook of sorts. So I wish it had been a little bit more of that and maybe a little less heavy on the rituals, because yeah, after a certain point, all the rituals and invocations were just kind of repeats of each other, and it so got a little bit repetitive. after a while. And then this also goes into lunar gardening and plant care, which I know is not only a big like magical tradition of like plant and harvest certain plants during specific cycles of the moon for like maximum magical potential, but also from a practical gardening perspective, you do want to wait until certain lunar cycles to like plant plants, because I think based on like the tide pole and just the amount of light that you're getting. Like, for instance, if it's a full moon, your plant is going to be getting not only sunlight during the day, but more moonlight during the night. And so it will encourage your plant growth. So there is also a practical reason behind that, which I had never really thought of before, but it is something to keep in mind. But I feel like, yeah, again, trust your gut, go off of what your own internal cycles and intuition are telling you in terms of when you feel like doing a spell or a working. If it's not a specific lunar cycle, just go do the dang thing. You know, it's better to have done it on the wrong cycle of the moon than to have not done it at all, in my opinion. But again, I'm pretty chaotic. I work with Loki, so take it with a grain of salt. Let's see, what else? I don't think I really had a whole lot else marked out specifically in this book. There is a specific section in here on gardening and plants for children and incorporating and getting your kids involved in gardening and planting and different things that you can do with them and different easy plants that they can work with. So if you are a parent that wants to get your child involved in gardening, I highly encourage that. Like many children nowadays, especially in America, live in food deserts and don't know where their food comes from and aren't familiar with various types of produce and how plants grow and where it comes from. Like, for instance, from my own personal experience, I never knew until starting a garden as a full-grown adult that when you go pick a cucumber off of the vine, that shit is pointy, y'all. Like every little bump that you see on a pickle, and when you go pick that cucumber off the vine, that is a spike, and it will stab you right in the hand if you're not careful. And the same with zucchinis. I did not know this. Like before you wash them and everything, like zucchinis are like hairy. And it's almost like a more tame version of like a nettle, like a stinging nettle, in my opinion, because if you like pet a zucchini the wrong way, those little hairs will like go into your skin and can be kind of irritating. And I never knew this kind of shit before I started growing my own vegetables. So I think it's just not only healthy and good for kids to just spend more time outdoors and eat their vegetables, but also to see the whole process from start to finish. And you can show them like the whole circle of life and like the whole ecosystem of it all. And just, yeah, aside from like witchy magical associations, it's just cool to like, yeah, get your kids involved. So she does have a whole separate section on that, and then also a list of different activities that you can do during the different Sabbats with your children. Like it says, Imbolc, visit a children's farm to see the new lambs. Ostara, have the egg hunt. So yeah, that was kind of cool. Not really practical to me or useful for me because I have cats. But yeah, there is a lot here in terms of practical information. Just in terms of like witchy information, it was just not my kettle of fish because it's very heavily Wiccan based in terms of the rituals and the traditions that she's going into. But outside from that, there is still a lot of useful information here. I just had to skim through a lot of stuff that I wasn't really interested in to get to it. And I just wish that yeah, there had been more than just one chapter of like a brief overview of magical associations with different plants. But I have a lot more specific books when it comes to that realm of studies. So we will get more in depth with it here as it goes on, but I thought this would be a very good, easy book to start with. And it is. It is a very nice book for how to begin the whole process of starting a sacred space outdoors and incorporating witchcraft and magic into your everyday gardening practices. And then once we hit page 145 here, 78% of the way through the book, we're already in the appendices, which is what witchcraft really is. Again, just a general overview of Wiccan beliefs and traditions, and what a general witch or Wiccan might believe. And that's about it. Yeah, and then Appendix 2 is glossary of terms and definitions. So yeah, that's really my whole review and all I really have to say about this book. There is a lot of information in it, most of which was not really applicable to me in terms of my personal practice, because I tend to stray away from the more structured, formalized, traditional Wiccan path, which this was laying out rituals very much along that path, and according to those guidelines. But yeah, still, as always, you can adapt and utilize these different things to your own personal practice. So there's still a few things in there that I might start doing in terms of actually specifically trying to get Freyr and Freya more directly involved in my gardening and my outdoor stuff. But yeah, for me personally, I just feel like when I'm out there working in the garden, I'm already working with those deities and working with the land spirits. I don't really feel a need personally to make it official and do a big, grandiose, formal thing with it every time I go out there. But in terms of maybe like not only having a witch's garden, but yeah, also like a sacred space in terms of like a meditative space, just somewhere that you can go to meditate, channel, and do witchy shit. There is some good information on how to go about doing that, and a lot of practical suggestions and tips and tricks. But yeah, I was just personally looking for more of a overall, if you want to start a witchy garden, because I want my front yard garden to be kind of like a cottage garden with native plants and herbs and like things that are friendly to pollinators and butterflies, where it's just kind of unstructured, not very landscaped, and just kind of allowed to do its thing. And then in my backyard, not only do I have my raised garden bed now this year, but I do want to have a little herb garden with herbs that we can use for cooking as well as spell work and things like that. So I was kind of looking for more of what are some plants that I can look for and use? How do I care for them? What are their magical associations? What are their medicinal associations? Here's how you can make tinctures and different things like that. So I'm hoping that with some of the other books that I have in my collection and on my reading list that I will get that more in-depth specific information that I'm looking for. This book just kind of gave you more of a beginner's steps of how to get the whole process started. And yeah, only one chapter in terms of like actual plants and their associations. And that was still like very broad and generic. So yeah, I'm going to be doing a whole video here coming up soon on symbolism in magic, where I'll kind of touch on that. And I want to do a video coming up soon on the importance of nature in paganism, as far as I'm concerned. So look for those in the near future. But yeah, we're coming up on like the 50-minute mark here soon already. And I like to try to keep these things around about to an hour. But yeah, I'm wondering if anyone else has had a chance to read this book or has any suggestions for magic gardening type books, herbalism, green witch type books that might have more of what I'm looking for. Please leave your comments, reviews, and suggestions in the comments. So, because yeah, I'm definitely always on the lookout for that kind of stuff. But yeah, I do have a couple other books along these lines that I'm sure we'll get into here at some point in the book club if I don't read them on my own. But so we'll see what those hold. But yeah, other than that, I don't really have a whole lot to say on The Real Witch's Garden because, like I said, I ended up skimming through a large part of it because I wasn't really interested in some of the specifics and particulars of the Wiccan-based rituals because I'm not Wiccan. But if you are, and you're like, yeah, I'm more of a beginner witch, and you want to get the whole thing started, or you're just looking for some suggestions to how to like revamp or zhuzh up your outdoor space, or bringing the outdoors indoors into your practice, like, go for it. Read this book. But for me personally, it's definitely not top of my list or like needs to be added to my recommended readings or anything. So yeah, as always, just take it or leave it. And for me personally, most of it, this book for me was leave it, but that's okay. I still enjoyed reading. I still got a lot out of it. Since I had never really spent a lot of time or any time actually practicing Wicca, it was just something that I was interested in terms of being interested in paganism and looking for that type of path. But it ended up, just not being a good fit for me. So I never really actually got involved in practicing or doing anything along the lines of a Wiccan tradition. I just kind of went back to being agnostic for a long time, and then bam, like just met Freya, discovered Norse paganism, and have been like on the Norse pagan train ever since. So yeah, this was more, just not really my cup of tea, not anything that I'm really going to go incorporate a lot of into my own personal practice, but still a lot of good information there. And yeah, I think I'm going to leave this live stream off there because it's getting a little stuffy and humid up in this room. And I need to go check on Merlin, make sure he's not getting into any trouble. And like I said, don't really have a lot else to say about this book. But yeah, leave your reviews, leave your suggestions down in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this little chit chat with me. And until the next time, stay classy, pagans.